this podcast, we will be looking at storytellers, stories, and the reasons that oral storytelling is important in our world today. You would think with all the technology we have available that stories do not have a place anymore, but they are needed more than ever. For in storytelling is where we find truth, we find reality, and we find the heart of what it is to be human. Welcome to the heart of storytelling. My name is Alyssa Curtain, and let's go on an adventure. This week's episode we chat with Jenni Cargill-Strong, who is in Queensland. We talk about many things, from her online courses to working with children to starting stories from a very young age, hearing them from her mother. It's a fantastic interview with Jenni, who's had lots of experience in the Australian storytelling community, and I hope you enjoy this interview with Jenni. Welcome to this week's episode. This week we're speaking with Jenni Cargill-Strong, who is in Brisbane in Queensland in Australia. Welcome to the podcast, Jenni.
Thank you, Alyssa.
I'd love to hear about your storytelling journey, where you've been and what you've done in your career.
So I guess storytelling started for me with a mother who really loved telling me stories, and she had one of those warm, cuddly voices. You know, she had a voice that made you feel like you were being hugged, and she was a very huggy mother as well. So she'd sit next to me, and I'm not sure that it was, I think it probably was every night, but often she'd just be reading a story, but sometimes she would tell me a story, and she was a very animated person. She was that kind of person at a party that would entertain everyone and tell ordinary stories in a really entertaining way. So I grew up with that, and very expressive. So she would tell me, a range of stories, mostly just true stories. She didn't tell me any folk tales, really, but family stories. So things like what my grandparents did, and what my great-grandmother especially, she told me about, and what my older brother and sister, who are 8 and 11 years older than me, how they played, because times changed a lot. By the time I was born in the 60s, their upbringing in the 50s was significantly different. So hearing about the way that they played and what they were like when they were little was really enchanting to me. And there was one story that I used to sometimes beg for. You can't remember accurately how many times I begged, but it seemed like I asked for a lot. Mum would say, "What do you want that story again for?" And it was a really mundane story about a little girl going to the veggie markets and coming home with an enormous cauliflower. A cauliflower, it was so big she couldn't even see around the edge of it. And she could only kind of just muddle her way along, and took it all the way home so her mother make something yummy. And it was so interesting because I didn't even like cauliflower, but I had this feeling that being the youngest by such a long amount, I was quite spoiled. And I wasn't necessarily pushed to do things for myself and be independent. I was kind of mollycoddled a bit. So I'm just imagining that for me as a child, to imagine myself being a breadwinner, going out and bringing home food for the family all on my own. And clearly I was so little that a cauliflower could dwarf me. I think there was something about that. But it didn't actually happen in reality, but in my fantasy life, I really enjoyed the thought of that happening. And she also, I never got to meet my great-grandmother, Emily Jane. She was still alive when my older sister and brother were little, and she taught them lots of nursery rhymes and things, but she was long dead by the time I came along. But I met her through my mother's stories. And so I wrote a song about Emily Jane as well, just to connect, to sort of keep that thread of connection going. And part of the reason it was so important to know the story of Emily Jane was because I didn't actually enjoy my own grandparents very much. And I only got to know the grandparents on my mother's side who lived near us. The others were dead or far away. And that she was, the granddad was lovely, but grandma was very controlling and a very difficult woman, and made things in the family very difficult. So knowing that there had been a woman that mum had loved dearly, great-grandmother, and who was also resilient and very practical, was also really heartening for me to know that I was related to someone different than just the grandparents that I knew.
So how do you think those stories have framed you in your life and your sense of
belonging and identity, I guess, really.
Yeah, I mean, I
Yeah.
was very loved. So I had this wonderful, nurturing, rich soil to grow out of in that sense. I wasn't always encouraged to be independent, so I had to go and learn those skills of being, I'm still kind of learning those skills of, how to run your own life and be an adult. Um, but I certainly had a strong sense of who I was and where I came from. Even though I only had I didn't have the whole family tree. I just had my mother's side of the family, really. I didn't know, it was fairly sketchy on the other side of the family. But it, it, yeah, and also, she told me stories about my grandmother was a tailor. So the kinds of things that the women did in the family that were quite resourceful. So yeah. Hmm.
And so how long between you growing up and moving into professional storytelling, or even just storytelling just for fun yourself?
That came really late, and I left school. I went and worked in an office for 2 years. It was partly my father died when I was 15, so I went and worked at the insurance company that he had worked at, partly as a way of trying to be close to him, which of course didn't work. I didn't really learn much about him. It's just that I was in the place where he had been, where he had walked, which sort of was comforting. And I saved up for 2 years, went overseas with a friend, came back and went to uni and did English literature and sociology and things, but I didn't know what I really wanted to do with my BA, because we were so lucky to have a free education. You didn't have to know exactly. I thought maybe I'll be a teacher, but I didn't really want to be a teacher. My sister had been a teacher and I wasn't quite sure. And then I was doing part-time work in a food co-op, a really lovely food co-op in Brisbane. And then I was on a holiday with a boyfriend and I saw this poster, and it had an image of a woman hanging upside down. She was like, it was a drawing, and she had legs with stripy stockings, and she was looking through her legs with a mask on. So it was a very playful image. It was just black and white, very sort of cheap poster, and but it was on colored paper. And it was the first time. I don't remember having this really before that, and that's the main experience I remember of it. But I remember being drawn to this poster and feeling like I fell into it. It was like I fell into my destiny, and I thought, whatever that is, I don't really know, but I have to do it. I have to do it. And that wasn't drama action where I studied. That was an introduction, a 6-day introduction to performance arts. I had already been doing a little bit of theatre work as an adult, young adult, but there was the teacher. She was teaching clowning, and there was the teacher, Bridget Brandon, who ran the Drama Action Centre in Sydney for 10 years. And that was an amazing experience. So through meeting her, I then applied to drama action and studied full time, which was 3 days a week, for 2 years, which was just the most wonderful gift. I'm so lucky. I felt so lucky to have done that. That was my entree.
Yeah. So in that was, I mean, the theatre and storytelling obviously has a big crossover. Was the telling stories part of the vision that you had, or was it more
No,
being
not at
an
all. No,
actor?
I had started hanging out with people who performed in schools who were doing theatre and education, and that appealed to me. I had an experience at university of doing some university drama, and I thought that's not for me. Firstly, it was really bitchy, and I'm very thin-skinned. I just couldn't handle the bitchiness of it. And then also there was all this ego around it, and I didn't feel comfortable with it. And I also, the whole thing of reading somebody else's script and being told what to do by a director, I couldn't have articulated at the time, but it didn't ring true for me. But when I met people who are doing theatre and education, it was a little bit more co-created and improvisational. I thought, oh, that sounds interesting. And then it was very honest, even though sometimes I can be a bit of a chicken. For some reason, the honesty of a children's audience, because when children don't like what you're doing, you know about it. They're not going to pretend politely that they don't like it. So there's something about that appealed, and then it just happened to fall into place that I went to drama action. Drama action had a lot of very traditional theatre arts, so it wasn't about becoming an actor and learning script at all. We did voice, we did mummers, we did clowning, we did physical theatre, we did dance, and we did mask, and we did storytelling as well. And so storytelling happened about halfway through the first year. And I thought, oh, that sounds so boring. You know, small. Isn't that something old ladies do? You know, because I was all 27 then. And now I am an old lady. And yes, predominantly it is old ladies who do storytelling perhaps now and who come and listen sometimes. But yeah, and I just didn't really enjoy it the first couple of times, but that was because our main teacher was away on tour and someone else was filling in who wasn't as passionate about storytelling. They were a teacher of playback theatre and didn't really have the fire, but he came back and he was just so passionate about storytelling. But his form of storytelling was a theatrical type of storytelling. It was big storytelling aimed at, 500 people and more. So I learned this big form of, storytelling. And then luckily I was taken under the wing of some storytellers in Sydney, and one, Shadi Christian, became my mentor, a wonderful woman who still lives in Sydney, still involved richly with story and art, and also Frances Ingram and a whole bunch of other storytellers who kindly sort of helped me figure out how to do smaller scales, Donna Jacobs-Sire, smaller scale storytelling. And because at first, if I ever got to tell stories to a small group of people, I had this big style and they'd sort of be going, leaning back going, oh, this is quite a lot, isn't it? So I had to sort of figure out how to adjust my size and my energy. But the first year was absolutely exciting because we had an individual project at Drama Action, and our director was, we could choose from different directors, and one of the choices was Neil Cameron. I don't know if you know who Neil Cameron is, but have you ever been to Woodford Folk Festival?
No, I haven't. No.
So Woodford Folk Festival is, back when I was living in Brisbane, it was pretty easy to get to. But even from Sydney, I started going when I lived in Sydney. And yeah, what am I saying? I've only just moved back to Brisbane. So anyway, I used to go up from Sydney, and it started in Mullaney. And then it was a national folk festival, but it never was all that folky. It was all about all sorts of different kinds of music and theatre and comedy and all sorts of things. But Neil Cameron was this amazing performer. I've forgotten the name of the outdoor theatre company that he used to work for in England, but what was it called? The Salami Brothers or something. And they used to do this wonderful kind of particular style of outdoor theatre. I've forgotten all the terminology. And they did these very big processions, and he was very connected to the whole pagan tradition. So very much about celebrating the cross, seasons, the equinoxes and the solstices, and bringing the sense of place and connecting people to the sense of meaning of mythology. And so he was one of our directors. He'd done these amazing fire events. I hadn't met him yet when he first came to Drama Action. And so he was my director. And I chose to perform. It was a very big choice to perform for my very first story, but I had so much support at Drama Action. I had 3 days a week to just do nothing but think about drama, which was incredible. And all these people we were all supporting each other in the process. So I did the 3 of the 5 myth cycles of the descent of Inanna. So the courtship,
wow.
goddess Inanna, the marriage, the descent to the underworld, and the ascent from the underworld. And
Wow.
when I first brought the script to him, I'd almost basically taken Diane Volstein's text and written it out word for word, and only left out the tiny bits because I was so attached to it all. I couldn't figure out how to edit it. And he said, "This is going to hurt. It's all right." And he took this pen and he went, cut, 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 cut. He cut it back and he cut it back until I had a 45-minute performance. Because we had 45 minutes to perform. So he had to bring it back. And he did such a great job, it was such a great edit that he got all the essential things. But I just didn't know how to do that at that point. It was like, well, it was all too precious. And then he helped me figure out how to perform it, because that was a huge energy to personify. And I very rarely have performed it because it's such a big energy. You have to have a lot of energy and a lot of confidence to carry it off. So
Well, myths
amazing.
have that. Myths have that otherworldliness about them, which you have to. And Anna is your first. Oh my gosh, that's enormous. Start with a folk tale. No, straight for the myth, straight for the biggest myth.
I suppose I was so right for it. I was 27. I sort
Yeah.
of didn't know what I wanted to do. I had all this energy, and it was like I had never really found anything I was good at before. And all of a sudden, he was this incredibly niche thing that hardly anyone knew about. And it all came, all of the things that I could do came together and made me a good storyteller because I've got a strong voice and I'm very expressive and I'm very articulate and I'm strong physical presence and I can remember the words and but the thing that was so exciting about drama action was there was such depth to the training, and it was about community, and it was about coming to terms with yourself and actually healing yourself in the process. A lot of people who did it weren't looking to be performers. They were doing it for personal growth. There were doctors who were just dried out, and there was a nun who just left, stopped being a nun, and she wanted to do something to change her life. There was a nurse who was all, exhausted and depleted, and so people did it to bring back joy and juice into their life. And then sometimes they did use those skills in the world, but only a few of us actually wanted to be performers. But there was so much depth. There was a psychodramatic layer to it. And then getting to work with Neil Cameron was such a blessing because I didn't know that I was interested in all those things. But once I met him, it was like, oh, wow, yes, there's meaning in life. And I think the other thing that I love about storytelling is that because I had these grandparents who were not wise ancestors, the ones that I met, I only found the wisdom of my ancestors through my mother's stories of my wiser ancestor, my great-grandmother. But then I found that if you go back, of course, there are terrible stories that are not wise at all. But if you know how to decode them, there is such wisdom in these ancestral tales. And to know that it's not like history just is a march of progress and we always get wiser. We don't necessarily. There are some wisdoms that have always been known, and it's so heartening to think that wisdom lives back in time also. It's so heartening because I think in modern culture we get taught this kind of myth that there's just this march of progress and we just get wiser and smarter and everything gets better, but some things get worse. And we need to go back to those old ways and those old ways of thinking. We don't want to go back to being superstitious, but we want to be connected to place and connected to the planet more beautifully.
Yeah. What a lovely thing to say. And so, it sounds like you've had such a rich career. What sort of, when you started working as a storyteller, did you go into schools and libraries first, or did you move into adult spaces? What did you do?
Well, it was easier. I mean, I loved working for everyone, but it was easier. There was more money in working in schools when I first arrived when I first arrived. But I apparently started storytelling. It was I did drama action at 1990, 1991. And up until that time, there'd been a boom time for maybe 10 years, I'm not sure how long, where storytellers could make a living in schools. And I graduated just as that was starting to wane. And within a couple of years, it was winding down. And so it kind of went down. So I wasn't getting enough work to keep me going. And I don't really enjoy going off solo all the time. So I was doing tours in Sydney and different cities, but I didn't really enjoy that. So then I had an agent called Nora Goodrich Management in Sydney. I'm not sure if they're still going. And she connected me up to a medieval and Renaissance music ensemble who were looking for another singer, and I could sing. And I ended up singing and telling stories in that group. So we toured for 7 years through the Queensland Arts Council and Victoria Arts Council and various other organisations and agents through Nora and another agent in Victoria. And we did, for 7 years, we toured basically. And so that was pretty good fun. And sometimes we got gigs where we performed for adults in corporate settings, but there wasn't so much space for storytelling then. It was generally just background music that they wanted at a dinner or something.
Okay.
But I certainly did chase after work with adults wherever I could. I went to folk festivals and folk clubs in Sydney and folk festivals. So I got to perform, I think, mostly for adults in things like, the Sydney Storytelling Festival and the Woodford Folk Festival and the National Storytelling Festival and things like that. Yeah.
Do you prefer adult audiences, or you don't have a preference?
No, I kind of like everyone. But I just don't like only telling to children because there's so much. I like the full gamut of storytelling. I'm not such a specialist with preschoolers. I love telling to stories to preschoolers, and I maybe I'll develop that more. But I prefer stories that are a little bit more complicated than that, and I really do love telling stories to adults. So yeah, I'm happy telling to pretty much any age.
Mm.
Yeah.
Do you have a particular area, like a folk tale, myth, fairy tale, or a particular country that you like telling stories from, or a theme that you particularly are drawn to?
I guess I'm really interested in stories of the feminine and stories that build community and stories that connect us to the understanding that we are nature and the interconnectedness of all life. So I guess that's what I really love. I mean, as we all know, the history of the resurgence of storytelling was a lot through the libraries and a lot about multiculturalism, and that was still the flavor when I entered storytelling in schools. There was still a predominance probably of Anglo-Saxon tellers or people of an Anglo-Saxon background, not so much diversity at that time telling stories. And it felt like our role was to tell multicultural stories because we wanted to give that voice. But then as things have changed, then it's like, oh, okay, is that mine to tell or not? So I've been contemplating that and wanting to tell stories that are more from my own tradition. And the most recent little exploration of that that I did was I love the Selkie stories. And I mean, that's a whole nother story to follow as well, isn't it? Like, oh, who am I? Like, my genetics are Celtic, but I've never really fallen in love with or connected or had a epiphany in those ancestral lands. I'm here, I'm from here. And then, the whole idea of how you tell stories respectfully on land here, country here, is, not that it's difficult or anything, but it's just something to be mindful of. That's a whole interesting thing. So what I did was I took a Selkie story because I love Selkie stories, and I haven't told them much because I don't really like the trope, the most common version. There's so many beautiful ones of children, and there's male Selkies and female, but the one that's most common where the man steals her skin, I'm not as comfortable with. And so I haven't ever told it. But I decided I was invited to tell a story for the what's it called? The online concert that Cooper Brown
Oh, yes. Yeah.
participates. Yeah, fairy tale versions, or it's got another name. But
I know
anyway,
which one you mean. Yeah. Yeah.
yeah, I had a deadline to tell a story, and they said, "Oh, we know that you tell it wasn't exactly a Selkie story; it's really a seal story." And they invited me to tell that. I thought, no, that's not a Selkie story. I need a Selkie story. So I've been involved in the Australian Fairy Tale Society, and I'm really interested in that whole thing of how do you take stories from your own ancestral genealogy and bring them respectfully over here. So I haven't told it really broadly yet, but in small circles, I've tested it out. And I would like to consult with people from Tasmania, so Palawa people from Lutruwita. So I took this story and I made it as if the Selkies had also migrated from the Orkneys and they'd come down to live in the waters of Tasmania. And then they'd suffered the fate that the seals suffered at the hand of the sealers and then the settlers and then massacres, so that there was an analogy or a parallel between the fate of the Palawa in Tasmania and the fate of the seals and the Selkies. And yeah, so it's a love story with a happy ending. It's very different, she gets to look after her own skin. He doesn't steal it from her. And because she's lost all of her people, she doesn't have any need to go back and stay in the ocean. But so I've changed it a little bit. But it seems to work. So the next step is to get some cultural advice on it.
Sounds like a good story for the conference next year. Conference
Mm.
theme is water, so yeah, so it sounds like
For the fairy tale conference.
yeah.
Oh, really? It's a great thing to do. I think it's really an important thing for
Yeah,
Australians to consider.
absolutely.
Yeah.
So this podcast is called The Heart of Storytelling. What do you think is at the heart of storytelling, and why do we still need the oral tradition in 2024, 25?
Well, I guess I've covered a little bit of what I feel. Part of it is to connect to our ancestors. Part of it, I think it's a really beautiful way to connect to an older way of thinking. I think that connection can be at the heart of storytelling. So I think that there's three aspects. I was teaching for a little while at Southern Cross Uni to pre-service teachers about storytelling in the classroom, and we talked about relationality. What did we talk about? Relationality, empathic imagination, and connectivity. So that sense of I'm connected to my audience and we're co-creating the story together. That's a very intimate thing, which we've lost to such a great degree in mainstream culture, haven't we, with the dominance of screens and social media and sound bites and quick things, and all of our, including me, concentration spans sort of get shorter and shorter. But to be able to sink into that reptilian gaze, that kind of and have your body slow down and have your mirror neurons fire with somebody else and feel connected, that sense of communion. Because for me, it's almost like going to church. When I'm really looking forward to going and seeing my colleague and friend Annie Stewart tell stories, and my friend Deborah also is going to do a poem on the theme of Samhain, and I'm really looking forward to it. And for me, that's quietening down and sinking into your chair and just all being on the same magic carpet ride together. And sometimes it feels like it's a kind of communion, because you're all imagining the same thing together and feeling the same feelings potentially together, if you're really all into the story, but you're all doing it in your own unique way, and stimulating the mind and the heart and the soul so much, so that when a teller tells from their whole being and not just from their head, then you're also resonating. Your whole being is resonating with that and being transported and experiencing that. All of the things in a story, like those characters are experiencing, we're all there doing it. And so I just think it's such a beautiful holy communion.
Oh, it really is. And yeah, I told a story this morning, and just the kids were spellbound in that moment. And I thought, yeah, and it just kept building this beautiful space between us, because they were acting it out as I was telling it. So this is beautiful co-creation that we had. It's just magical. It's just, I don't think there's anything that can beat it, really. It's an experience as a teller for me. Yeah, for sure. Yeah.
And what age were they?
They're 8. They're
Oh,
8.
yes.
Perfect
Yes.
age for fairy tales. So I've just been telling them fairy tales, and it's just, and doing literacy and, literacy-based things with them as well. But that magic that's created in the story, and then which story are we doing today? That excitement that builds. We've created this little, exactly what you're saying. We've created this community that we've all co-created, which is beautiful, absolutely beautiful. So yeah, really, really great.
And you can build a common language together. You can refer to, remember about the boy with the sweet and sour berries, or remember this such and such. And it's a shorthand for a whole understanding.
Do you have a special moment in your storytelling career where you've gone, oh, my heart is just so full from that experience?
Well, I suppose what I should say, what's coming in my head is that I wrote a story for an ex-boyfriend. And was he an ex? I think we were still together at the time. It was a very heartbreaking sort of I was madly in love with him, and it wasn't never going to work. But we were really good friends. We'd been good friends for like 18 months, and then we became lovers, and then it just wasn't going to go anywhere, and I just couldn't let it go. And he had a lot of trouble feeling his feelings, and of course that's not uncommon. And his brother told me, explained something about how it was for him, and said it's probably a bit like that for John. And then I took those images that he had, and then I heard Brian Hungerford tell a story about something like a, a giant who had his heart buried in a tin guarded by wasps in a mountain far away, and I used all those images, and I wrote Golden Heart, which is one of my favorite poems that I've written. And it, unlike most stories, which I spend a lot of time drafting and redrafting, and it takes a lot of time, this one just was more like a download, and I just kind of did 2 or 3 drafts and bang, it was finished. And I wrote that story, and it was about this relationship not working and this man not being able to feel his feelings. And there was a mermaid in it, and there was all these, ancient fairy tale mythic sort of tropes in it. And through our lives, the happy ending kind of happened, where he was healed and he could feel his feelings, and he did have children, and he had all of the things that that weren't happening kind of came true. And when he heard it again and felt happy that that it had happened, then that was lovely, that I had been able to write a story that had a meaning for so many people, but also for the actual person I wrote it for.
So do you mostly write your own stories these days?
No, not at all. I really love telling folk tales and reweaving folk tales. I don't write many of my own at all. My son is busily writing a novel, and I really admire his dedication. I need someone to crack the whip and make me write some more. I've got a whole lot of finger puppets that are just waiting for a story. I like also creating stories that illustrate gardening or natural principles for children. I've got a whole lot of finger puppets that are just waiting for a story to be written about them, but I haven't quite done it yet.
So have you got any advice for emerging tellers or people who are thinking about moving into storytelling?
I would say it's good to do a course, but even if you can't do that, to notice the difference between a story that works as in written form, and a story that works in an oral form. And there are five main ones that I teach, and everyone has a different way of teaching that. But you need a story with it's got to be a fairly straightforward story, as you know. People can't listen to an oral story with a really complicated story with too many characters and too much happening. So it's got to be quick, straightforward, and a satisfying conclusion. But just keep having a go. Maybe practice on your kids. Or what I would say, I've never really just thought about a succinct answer to that question, really, because I guess for me the answer is really long. There's just so much to think about. But I think one thing is just to be kind to yourself and to take baby steps, and don't expect to be a master storyteller immediately. But what I do often say is, if you tell from the heart, that's the most important thing. Find a story that you love and tell from the heart, and be prepared to practice it a bit in your spare time. But it doesn't matter if you don't get it perfect. You just need to get the main things. I love that parachute diagram. Do you ever do that one? It's a parachute. I learned it from Ashley Ramsden when he came over to Australia. He came to Brisbane, and I was lucky to be near Brisbane at the time. And there's this parachute that he did, and he said, when you're learning a story, it's just learning a sentence at the start, a sentence at the end, a sentence in the middle, and if you've got time, a sentence in between, so that at least you've got a solid beginning, a solid ending, a solid denouement or climax. And maybe if it's a longer story and you've got the time to, have the ones in between, and just sort of, you've got not too far to stumble between. But definitely I would rather hear a story told fumblingly by a beginner from the heart than a story that is really confident but told from the ego. Yeah, choose a story from the heart and tell from the heart, and then you can't go too far wrong.
I really love that idea of telling from the heart. I mean, the podcast is called The Heart of Storytelling, so my philosophy is very aligned with that. And the last interview I did, she was very much the same, that sense that it's the heart-to-heart connection that we're having when we're telling a story. We're connecting with another person through this intangible sort of place, through the medium of story, which is just so beautiful. Yeah. Yeah.
And so needed.
Yes.
needed. And that's what, my mother could have told me a story about anything in a sense, because every word that she spun around me was love. It was a big hug, and you can think about the story as that. I remember at Drama Action, we had a voice teacher who said, imagine your words are a golden net reaching over the audience, which is another really beautiful image. And someone else who was a meditator said, imagine a blue glow over you and all of the audience, connecting you all up. Yeah.
I wonder if that also works for prior to going to tell a story. Do you have any pre habits that you do before telling a story?
If I'm particularly nervous or if I've got time, it's really nice to be able to go into the space and look out and imagine the audience coming in and kind of welcome them as if they're coming into your lounge room. It's like, so it helps remove any nerves. And then, it's like, oh, welcome into the space. And it shifts that dynamic of, I have to do something for them. And it's like, oh, you're welcoming. I'm welcoming you into my space. How lovely. And then also, if there's a bit of nerves, just to remember to that it's not about me. It's about me being a conduit for a story, and hopefully being able to listen well enough to what needs to be told. That, I mean, generally in a more formal program, you decide the stories and the ones you tell, because I'm kind of tuning into the event. I'm imagining what it's going to be like, what the age group is going to be like, and planning it according to the experience that I have with those kind of audiences. But as you get more experience, sometimes, as you would know, it's possible that you get there and you go, no, we need a different story, or another story says, you've got to tell me. And you may not know until the end why. We may never know exactly why that was, but sometimes you find out there's a particular reason. And I had that experience at Bentley blockade. So I was a part of the Bentley blockade, which was outside of Lismore, and I was living in Mullumbimby at the time, where I lived for a very long time. And there was unconventional gas mining was about to happen, and the whole community was opposed, 98% opposed, and the government was pushing it through. So the community did this amazing campaign to stop it, and it was successful after about 3 months, doing just every possible angle of stopping it. And on the last day, we gathered around the spot where the earth was going to be penetrated by the drill. And a friend of mine had done this gorgeous artwork, this gorgeous earth mandala. And we all stood around. We'd had a sort of a ceremony. It was really happy to have won. And it was kind of sad because we'd all worked together for 3 months, and it actually been fun as well as stressful. And I said, clearly no one wanted to go. And I said, would you like a story? And this story had, I'd wanted to tell a story there and not had an opportunity. And this particular story kept coming to me. And I thought, I don't think you're the right story. How on earth are you related to this? But this story, when I told it, I trusted it. I did have a little epiphany just in the few minutes before it came in time to tell the story. And I realized it was the perfect story. And then as I told it, and after I told it, I thought, wow, that was so the perfect story. And it was just a great lesson in how your intuition is very different to your logical mind. My logical mind wasn't able to figure it out properly, that this story fitted in so many ways. And it was, you may know that story of it's an Indian story of the woman who wouldn't sing her song.
No, I
I
don't
think
know
the
that one.
original is one thing. It's like she wouldn't sing a song or she wouldn't dance. But Donna Jacob-Syfe tells a version which she may have got from someone else. So I learned it from my friend in Sydney, Donna Jacob-Syfe, that this woman wouldn't tell her story, sing her song, or dance her dance. It's a very, very quirky, lateral kind of weird story, really. But in the end, it's got a tragic ending, but it's still it was an encouragement to sing your song, dance your dance, tell your story. And we had been at that action. And in fact, that's why we won. We won so well. They told their story really well to the audience, to the media, and to the community. They did dance. They made it a fun celebration, that there was FOMO. People didn't want to miss out. They sang. They had rituals. They really went all out in every facet, every sort of cultural way of celebrating. They did it. So it was like, wow, of course that story fits. And
Oh,
afterwards, people, yeah, that really fits.
wow.
Yeah.
That sounds like a wonderful ending to a a rally or an action that you're taking, you know, and it's also then you're also nurturing the space of people to share that moment. Just lovely way to do that.
It was really lucky. I mean, there were thousands and thousands of people involved in the action. It was only about 20 people in that little circle, but it still felt incredibly profound because it was right on the spot that it was all about. It was right on the spot where it was going to be drilled. And there was a real feeling there. It was beautiful. Yeah, I was very lucky to be.
So well, I have spoken to other people who do activism, climate activism, and environmental activism, and news story in that. So it's a very powerful medium for building communities, and you know.
I'm very interested in getting into more of that. That's really where a lot of my focus is going in my teaching.
Well, stories do that though, don't they? They break down this wall of separation that we have. Yeah,
they can do. Yeah. I mean, obviously stories can be used to do the opposite, but stories have that incredible power to connect. Yeah.
So tell me about this online course you've got going on.
So at the moment I'm running Storytelling Foundations, and that's going for 6 weeks. So we've just had our first week together and gotten going, and then so I'll probably run another one of those next year, or I definitely will. From time to time, I will run online courses, and hopefully now that I'm settling into Brisbane, I'll find a venue to do face-to-face courses as well. Actually, I'm doing one at the end of November at the Queensland Writers Centre, and it's aimed at using various story in ways of capturing stories and mining for your own stories using story maps of a kind and story drawing, as well as movement. So it's aimed at people who are writing a memoir and finding and unearthing those stories, and that's on the 30th of November at the Queensland Writers Centre. And then next year I have booked the Maruka Social Space for a monthly community storytelling event. So when I lived in Mullumbimby for 2 years, once a month, I had an event called Stories in the Club, and that was fabulous. And so I'd really like to do that again, but on a slightly less monumental scale, make a little bit more informal. And the Maruka Social Space is a really beautiful community centre in Maruka, which is on the south side, which is the suburb I grew up in, actually. And so anyone who's interested, it's going to be Saturday afternoons. I think it's third Saturdays, but if you want to go to my website and join my newsletter, then you'll find out about what I'm doing. And the other kind of teaching that I do is storytelling for change makers, which is, I'm very passionate about that too.
Oh, that sounds wonderful. So where can people find you? What's your website?
So www.storytree.com.au.
That sounds like the best place to finish the interview. So thank you so much for joining me today, Jenni.
My pleasure. Thank you so much for taking me down memory lane into all my favourite memories.
Well, that's our episode for today. I hope you've enjoyed learning about storytelling and folktale, fairytale, myth, legend, or personal tales, wonder tales, all sorts of stories, and the art of storytelling, and why we really need to continue using it today. You can find more information about me at alyssacurtain.com or at Alyssa Curtain Stories on Facebook, Instagram, YouTube, and TikTok. I hope that you can find your heart in storytelling.